introduction. You said that I'm going to be a TV star this evening. Actually, I got to last year participate in my first ever BBC TV series. So those of you that watch Who You Think You Are might skip back to October last year when there was an episode with a young blogger by the name of Joe Sugg, who assumed that I would know nothing about blogging in the IT industry. That was a mistake for him that day, but anyway. So I appear in there. Actually, it's a gold and silversmiths in EC1, where he was tracing his family history back to the early 1600s. And it turns out that one of his ancestors had become prime warden of the goldsmiths company. Hence the reason we were meeting in a gold and silversmiths workshop. He knew nothing about this. So when you see that program, the surprise that those characters express is genuine. And one of the things that I had to convey to him was that his ancestor lived in a house that had 16 fires in it. So 16 fireplaces. And that gave some indication of the grandiosity with which this particular gentleman lived. Unfortunately, that record of the number of fires in his property was dated in the earlier part of 1666. Whereupon one fire too many came their way. Right, so this evening's talk is, I'm not going to go through the whole book, we haven't got time for that. The book came as a result of me becoming a freeman in 2011. I stepped out of Guildhall. My wife turned to me and said, "That was a lovely ceremony, dear. What can you actually do?" 50,000 words and 10 years of research later, she would say, "I know rather too much now, thank you very much." So what I'm going to do is take on a little bit of a tour around some of the treasures of delivery halls. Now, this is a vast topic. It might as well be called Highlights of the National Trust. We could be here for weeks and still not cover even a modest proportion of the highlights. So I'm quite eclectic about what I describe to be a treasure. It's not necessarily something that's worth a lot of money or has, is physically very large. What I have got here is a couple of treasures to hand around for you to have a look at. One of them is a historical artifact, which is a copy of Freedom of the City of London. Don't be afraid to handle it. If there's any vegans in the audience, I must point out that that is parchment, it's sheepskin. Okay. What I want you to have a look at is the name of the Chief Finance Officer of the city, otherwise known as the Chamberlain, in the 1960s. That's a 1960s artifact. Okay. The other one, which you can pass around this way if you wish, is a die stamp that I had produced at the Goldsmiths Hall during lockdown, produced by the Assay Office, and it has on it what's called a sponsor's mark. It's essentially my initials. It doesn't replace the hallmarking process, but for individuals that privately commission gold, silverware, platinum, or the fourth metal that they assay is palladium, if they're assayed and given the hallmark of the Goldsmiths Company and a date mark, you can optionally have a sponsor's mark added. But the sponsor's mark has to be registered at Goldsmiths Hall. So you have to have one of those manufactured. They also keep an electronic version for laser engraving. And that's valid for 10 years until they come back and squeeze some more money out of me. Right, so let's crack on with the lecture proper. Treasures of delivery halls. The challenge with this subject is where to start. Not just where to end. Well, that's easy to do. I'll stop talking after 45 minutes or so, wherever we get into this. But it's where to start. So what treasure do you choose as the kind of emblem of the city that binds the city and all delivery companies together? Back in 2015, I had the opportunity to handle this. The Lord Mayor's Crystal Sceptre. It came out to play in 2015, and I asked very politely if I could get access to it in the Guildhall. And the then clerk to the Chamberlain's Court, who may have spoken here before, Murray Craig, he gave me access to the vaults, went down 3 floors underneath Guildhall, and I was left unsupervised with this and a mass of other gold and silverware for the best part of 3/4 of an hour. If I ever go back, I'm taking the Tesco's carrier bag with me. The Lord Mayor's Crystal Sceptre. The sceptre itself as an artefact dates from 1415. This was a thank you gift from Henry V to the City of London and the livery companies to thank them for their moral, political, economic, logistical, supply chain management, know-how support, material support, and even the provision of additional archers over and above that which he had asked for when they found out that things were going rather well in France. And the city had bankrolled Henry V. When he came back, there was a great pageant put on, and a big thank you banquet, celebrations, so on. It was as much about reminding the king to repay his debts as it was saying well done. Part of the debt repayment was the presentation of the crystal sceptre. It's quite a diminutive artefact. That's the top of it. You see the arms of Henry V there. That armorial there is about the size of a second-class postage stamp. The whole thing is about 17 inches long. And when I held it, I realised it's actually quite fragile. I felt a little bit uncomfortable handling it. They didn't even give me any white gloves, which I was really surprised about. Notwithstanding the fact I was left unsupervised with it for 3/4 of an hour. So I took quite a lot of photographs of this and other things. But for me, this is the artefact that really binds the city and the livery companies together, because it was a thank you gift. When this only comes out to play twice. Once a year, in the silent ceremony, the change of office between the outgoing Lord Mayor and the Lord Mayor-elect. And along with the other city regalia, the outgoing Lord Mayor touches it, the incoming Lord Mayor touches it. That's the transition of office. Actually, after all of that flummery takes place in Guildhall, there's a much more mundane, but in some ways more memorable aspect of the ceremony, which is outside when the Lord Mayor gets into the limousine. The Common Crier and Sergeant at Arms says to the outgoing Lord Mayor, "My Lord Mayor, I have kept the keys to the city seal safe for the last year," and presents them to the incoming Lord Mayor, who then hands them back to Common Crier and Sergeant at Arms, City Sword Bearer, not Common Crier and Sergeant at Arms, the City Sword Bearer, who removes his hat, and there's a little pocket underneath. And he says, "I shall keep it under my hat." And that's where it stays. So, there we go. Anyway, back to the crystal sceptre. So, 1415, I got to handle it, very diminutive, thank you gift to the City of London. When this came out in 2015 for public display for a full year, it was described by the Daily Telegraph as the greatest thank you gift in English history. And I find it difficult to disagree with that. So, I said it was fragile, and indeed the Victorians managed to break it. It was fixed, and they produced a facsimile. There is the facsimile. No sooner did they produce the facsimile, they managed to break that. So this facsimile sits in the Chamberlain's Court in Guildhall. It's a marvellous talking piece. But why did they produce a facsimile? Other than, of course, the antiquity and the value of the crystal sceptre. The other reason they produced a facsimile is because they have to practice the silent ceremony every year. Two reasons for that. Number one, it's done in silence. There are no words of command. And they don't put up signs. It's all done with nods and winks and bows. Secondly, a certain proportion of the high officers of the city might be doing it for the first time. Or even if they're not doing it for the first time, the last time they saw it was 12 months ago, briefly. Sitting in a seat, not actually participating. So every year they have to go through a dry run. So they produce this facsimile in order to facilitate a dress rehearsal for the silent ceremony. Of course, the Victorians broke the thing, and it remains in that broken state in the Chamberlain's Court today. So what do they use as a facsimile nowadays? A lady's compact umbrella. It's about the same size and weight. So that's the first treasure. Let's move on. Let's go to a livery hall, and I couldn't start anywhere other than my own company's hall, IT Hall, Information Technologies Hall. Yes, the Information Technologies Company has a hall. It's not quite unique amongst the modern livery companies. Modern means any livery company formed since 1926. So in 1,000 years' time, they'll still be modern, even if they're 1,000 years old. So the Information Technologies Hall is the gift of the national treasure on the left-hand side there. And I know at least one member of this audience will know who this is. So that's Dame Stephanie Shirley, Companion of Honour, and a senator of the IT industry, nothing less than a senator of the IT industry. Dame Stephanie was a pioneer of many working practices which, frankly, are part and parcel of my daily life now. It's like home working, mobile working, flexible working, mothers being able to return to work after having had children, employee share ownership. All of these facets were things, facets of employment were really innovations that she pioneered. Dame Stephanie, first female past master of the company, and the hall was her gift to the company. So the company's never had decks, but it does have a hall. There we see the beadle of the company, Alan O'Connor, former Coldstream Guards colour sergeant there, just leaning out the door, welcoming fellow liverymen. And up there you'll see the flag with the armorial bearings of the company. I was giving a talk at a private school in Wiltshire just before the pandemic, and some young lady took a shine to some other photographs I took of Alan in his ceremonial uniform. Oh, what does that gentleman do? And I said, are you a boarder here? And she said, yes. I said, like Thursday next week, make sure you've got the bedroom window open. About 8 PM, listen towards London, you'll hear what he does. So yeah, Alan is well known within the city as being by far and away the loudest beadle. Let's go inside. So if the hall is the company's largest physical treasure, let's have a look at the largest physical movable treasure. So here we have the Millennium Dish. It is actually about 3 foot in diameter, the real thing, so it's absolutely vast. It's designed to be a rose water bowl. So it forms every aspect of livery company insignia has a practical origin in some way. Before the advent of knives and forks, you would wash your hands between courses. So rose water would be passed around in a bowl. Most livery companies still practice that ceremony, albeit of course now we have cutlery. So what they do is they invite everyone to dab the corner of their napkin in the rose water, and then use that to cool the vagus nerve just behind the ear here. So if you press, there's always a nerve there. You can, ouch, if I press it. It's otherwise known as the automatic nerve. And there is science behind this, that if you stimulate that and keep stimulating it, then it assists with digestion. And the theory is the reason it got the title of the automatic nerve is because aldermen used to dine so sumptuously they needed some assistance with the digestion. So there we go. It's a rose water bowl. Let's zoom into the. Oh, before we do zoom into the centre, each of the rays around the outside here is inscribed with the name of a liveryman of the company. Livery companies have 2 ranks. Freeman, it's a bit like a member of a professional body. Liveryman's a bit like fellow. So this is the liveryman in the year 2000. The company was formed in 1984. So that's evidence of the zeitgeist nature of the profession, the explosive growth of a livery company. Most livery companies are around sort of 250, 300 member mark. There are a couple of thousand members. The information technologists by the year 2000 had in excess of 500 members. It's now up to 800 members. Let's zoom into the centre. There we see the armorial bearings of the company. If I were to colour those in with a digital image of the arms over the top, there we go. Another one of my areas of narrow specialist interest that my wife describes as part of my medieval midlife crisis is heraldry. As penance for my many and various sins, I'm a fellow of the Heraldry Society, trustee of the Heraldry Society, and a member of Cambridge University Heraldic and Genealogical Society, the least edgy of Cambridge's student societies. So, just a little bit on heraldry here. These arms, lawfully granted by the College of Arms. I walked past there on the way here this afternoon, just waved. The college has just gone through a major refurb. Let's talk a little bit about the symbolism. Key to knowledge. Obviously connected with information technology. Green, shield. When I got into computing way back in the early 1980s, most terminals were green screens. Blue for the colour of electricity, sparks of electricity. The top part of the shield here, in heraldic terms, is known as the chief. The chief there is gold, because gold is an excellent conductor of electricity, not the best, but an excellent one. The reason why it's used is because it's very malleable. Silver is actually a better conductor of electricity, but is apt to tarnish and less malleable. So that's the kind of core shield. Up here we have the crest. Everything on top of a helmet in heraldry is called the crest. The word crest is not synonymous for the whole thing. When you hear people describe this as a crest, it's like scraping your nails down a blackboard to me. So Mercury the winged messenger. Again, an allusion to speed, the transit of information at speed. Incidentally, Mercury the winged messenger is also present as the symbol of the Royal Corps of Signals. They call it Jimmy. And our military affiliation is with the Royal Corps of Signals. And then we've got a winged horse and a griffin as supporters there. The motto at the bottom, Cito. Any Latin scholars here? It means swiftly. So again, connection with the Royal Signals, their regimental motto is Certa Cito, swift and sure. So Cito means swiftly, although I have to say, when I joined the livery company, I was full of vim and vigour, and the clerk to the company, that's the chief executive, said to me, you must realise, Paul, that there are different definitions of swiftly. And most livery companies advance at the pace of a striking slug. Let's move on. A couple of other treasures to point out. So I asked Alan to get access to the treasures cabinet, and one that caught my eye was the roll of honorary freemen. Which on that day was opened on the page where a certain William H. Gates III, sorry, Bill Gates, so one of the co-founders of Microsoft. Actually, the next page, I wish I'd have turned it over to the next page and taken the photograph, because the next one, I subsequently learned, has got Sir Tim Berners-Lee on it. And as a former IBM, I would like to say that since Bill Gates joined the company, the standards have risen. So that's my dig at Microsoft. A few other just artifacts here. Every livery company participates in the Loving Cup ceremony, and there's been some marvellous innovation post-pandemic as to how to practice that ceremony of sharing the Loving Cup around the audience during a formal banquet. It'll be a few years before it comes back in the form that, if any of you, any gentlemen here, Freemasons, will be aware of. But that normally would pass among the diners. One would drink, another one would remove the lid, a third guards the back of the individual drinking. I won't get into this history around that. If you ever visit Corfe Castle, you can read why that happened. Down here, this artifact is the Beadle's staff of office, sometimes erroneously called a mace. The Beadle's staff of office performs the same function as a tour guide's umbrella. Follow me. It is not a symbol of royal authority, and it's not for whacking apprentices over the head with. Alan, his staff of office, has this bulbous end as Mercury the winged messenger on top, and the top unscrews. He will not tell me what he keeps in there, but what I can say for certain is, during formal banquets, after the receiving line and the welcoming of the guests and all of the initial ceremonial that goes with a livery company banquet, Alan retires to an outmess for about 20 minutes before he's needed back for the next part of ceremonial. All I can say is he comes back a lot more relaxed and happier than he typically is during the beginning. So I've got my suspicions about what he keeps in the top there, but he won't let me look. Right, let's move on. There is actually a short video here, but I'm going to skip over it, which is from you can go and look this up, Keys to the Cities by Stephen Fry. It's a look at the ceremonials related to the livery companies, and he goes through the Loving Cup, but in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over that. Right, let's move on to Barber Surgeons' Hall. Barber Surgeons' Hall is a brave post-World War II rebuild. Their previous hall was completely destroyed, although they remain on the same site since 1441. It wasn't difficult for me to find a principal treasure in Barber Surgeons' Hall, because it's big, it's bold, it's obvious, and I've talked in front of it before, and it is this. So it's Hans Holbein the Younger, Henry VIII, presenting the newly joined Barber Surgeons Company with their royal charter. It's absolutely vast, and it was magnificent to be able to give a lunch speech in front of this. During the Second World War, this was taken off to, I think, a mine in South Wales somewhere in the way with many of the other treasures of the company. Hence the reason we've still got it. So this is the occasion of the unification of the barbers with the surgeons. Why was that necessary? So there had long been arguments over demarcation of responsibilities. I think it was Pope Innocent II that said that no person in holy orders could draw blood. So where people typically went to for medical care to the monasteries, they found that the monks could no longer, pull teeth out or do minor incisions. So what did the monks do? They handed their sharp instruments to the person in the monastery that knew how to wield them, the barber, and said, "You wield it, we'll tell you what to do." So that's how the barbers got into the game of dealing with minor surgery. Until the Royal Navy took surgeons to sea, surgery was a lower status profession than was that of a barber. And it wasn't until the Royal Navy took surgeons to sea, and then they became initially wardroom officers, essentially warrant officers, and then wardroom officers of commissioned rank, did they become gentlemen. So here we're seeing essentially a long-running argument between two different forms of surgery, that performed by surgeons, that performed by barbers. And it was dealt with by unifying the two bodies into one. However, Henry VIII was the trump of his era. This event never took place. There was no royal charter. There was no presentation of a royal charter. Actually, the Barber Surgeons Company was merged by Act of Parliament. But at the time, it was such a big political deal that the king decided he wanted to be in the picture, and had a picture painted by the court painter Hans Holbein the Younger of him presenting a royal charter that didn't exist and an event that never took place to a company that had been unified by Parliament. Now, so important was this event that never took place with a charter that didn't exist, when it was recorded in this painting, certain members of the Barber Surgeons Company who had not been present at the event that never took place for the charter that didn't exist felt it was important that they were also present and had themselves painted in this additional row at the back. So the whole thing is a work of fiction. But it, to this day, is a magnificent treasure.
So fake news.
Quite so. Right, moving on. Other artifacts that the historian in the Barber Surgeons Hall allowed me to have a look at were these artifacts here. Now, what might you think they are?
Crowns.
Crowns, coronets, something you wear on a head. Yeah? Perfectly reasonable assumption until I tried doing so, and you realise they're perfectly spherical. So they're not going to sit comfortably on anyone's head.
They're containers, aren't they?
You might think they're containers. There's actually velvet in there. It looks like a smoking cap in each of those. So at first look, yeah, that's something you wear on your head. Except it will not sit comfortably on anyone's head other than Humpty Dumpty. So unless you've got a perfectly spherical head, it's not going to work for you. No, it turns out they're called garlands. That's what they're called. Now these have probably been reinvented several times over history. So their original practical use has kind of been lost, but the way the company uses them now is they hand them hand to hand through each of the officers of the court during the transition from outgoing master to master-elect, and then junior warden becomes senior warden, so on and so forth. So it's an act of passing the token betwixt them. So they're called garlands. I did ask the historian there, did they have any theories about where that came from? And they said that the best that they had come up with is that probably in a previous iteration they were an object that was worn, whether it was worn either around the neck, like a torque from ancient Britain, or something around the sleeve. They're not really sure, but they don't believe it was ever worn on the head. Next up, we'll move on to Watermen's Hall. Now, the Watermen and Lightermen's Company is an anomaly amongst delivery companies in that It's counted with and amongst the livery companies, but it is emphatically not a livery company. In fact, it's a company without livery. Why is that? The Watermen and Lightermen's Company was created by Act of Parliament, not merged, created. So it's an entity that was foisted on the city by Parliament to regulate the trade out there on the river, both the passenger traffic and the freight traffic. I read a marvellous book by the Bursar of New College, Oxford, entitled Livery Companies, Their History, Law and Customs, where he describes the sort of role of the Watermen and Lightermen's Company in the 1800s. And he said you could think of them something between the taxi trade and the haulage trade nowadays. And he said they were known for their quick-wittedness, the speed with their fists, and their willingness to get in a fight. But he goes on to say, nothing like our calm, gentle caddies nowadays. So there you go, that's the Watermen and Lightermen. Let's go inside and have a look at a few artefacts. So these two artefacts caught my attention, not least because I've got a jacket that looks remarkably similar to the one on the right-hand side. I didn't wear it today, it's too heavyweight and hot, but the one on the left is the one that you may be more familiar with. These are examples of what? Any idea? Doggets, coat, and badge. That's it. It is exactly what it says on the tin. This is the prize that's won by the apprentice of the Watermen and Lightermen's Company that wins the rowing race up and down the Thames. Doggets, coat and badge is the world's oldest continuously contested sporting competition. Actually, it's a wager. It's not so much a competition, it's a wager. Thomas Doggett was an Irish playwright, an actor and theatre owner, and allegedly a member of the Fishmongers' Company. During his life, he set down the wager for the Watermen and Lightermen's apprentices. Although, strangely enough, the Fishmongers' Company have no record of his being a member of the company, but it is the fishmongers that adjudicate in the competition to this very day, even though the participants are apprentices of the Watermen and Lightermen's Company. Okay, so two examples there of Doggett's coat and badge. You'll see the coat and badgemen processing the Lord Mayor's show. To this day, they process ahead of the Lord Mayor's coach, carrying oars as an indication of the fact that some part of that pageant always took place on the river. It's a misnomer to think that it was principally a river pageant. It was always that some part of it was held on the river, only because that was the safest and quickest way to move up and down the city. But of course, the Lord Mayor had to present himself at the Court of Justices, the Royal Courts of Justice, to swear allegiance to the monarch. Next up was this artefact, which is in Watermen's Hall, which has got nothing to do with the Watermen's Company. Nothing whatsoever. And this is the uniform of the Queen's Barge Master, in this case a former Barge Master, Major Edwin Hunt MVO, and I thought, that's odd. Major doesn't sound to me like a nautical rank. I thought first it might be a Royal Marine, but no, it's actually a Royal Engineer, so it's a sapper like me. In fact, he passed away about 5 years ago, Edwin Hunt. That was his uniform. So why is it in the Watermen's Hall? Why have Queen's Barge Master's uniform in the Watermen's Hall? Other than it's a nice place to put it on display and it's got some connection with the river. Well, if you're looking for Queen's Watermen and a Barge Master, where might you go to procure them from? You might go to the Watermen and Lightermen's Company. And who might you choose amongst their ranks in order to be the Queen's, perhaps former winners of Doggett's coat and badge? So whilst it's not an absolute, it's almost a given that if you're a coat and badge winner of old, that later in your career, if you're still interested, you might be invited by Her Majesty to become one of the Queen's watermen, one of whom amongst them becomes the Barge Master. There, incidentally, is past Queen's Barge Master and a fellow waterman in the Watermen's Hall. I'm absolutely certain, livery companies are assiduous in the maintenance of customs and traditions, so I'm perfectly certain that it is entirely acceptable for those gentlemen to retain their hats on their heads indoors in the presence of Her Majesty. There will be some historical reason why that is perfectly acceptable for them to do so. Let's move on. Next hall, Ironmonger's Hall. This is a bit of a rapid gallop here, but I'm going to move on to Ironmonger's Hall. A Tudor-looking building dating from the 1920s. That's important. Remember that fact, 1920s. Let's go inside. This is the last hall that I dined in. And in their courtroom, they have this painting by Alexander Talbot Rice. And it is the Queen at Temple Bar, where Temple Bar used to be, at the boundary of the city, participating in the ceremony of the Pearl Sword. Anyone know what's actually happening here? So, depending where you go on the internet, you'll read all kinds of weird and wacky stories telling you that the monarch needs to ask permission to enter the square mile. Nonsense. The monarch does not need to ask permission to go anywhere within her realms. What's happening here is actually an act of feudal fealty. The Lord Mayor is offering up his principal symbol of authority, the Pearl Sword. That Pearl Sword is a gift from a previous Elizabeth I, in the hope that the Queen doesn't retain it. Yeah? So what happens here is the Queen just touches the sword and says words to the effect of, "Oh, my Lord Mayor, I can think of no better citizen to govern my city of London than you," and it retains the Pearl Sword. In times past, they don't do it anymore, but when the Lord Mayor-elect is presented at the House of Lords to the Lord Chancellor, it used to be the case they had to take the Pearl Sword with them, and the Lord Chancellor would retain the scabbard. I'll have that, thank you very much. The Lord Mayor would keep the sword, the idea being that the monarch was physically manifesting their power to sheathe the sword and to withdraw the authority from the monarch. They don't do that anymore. Okay, another royal connected artifact I saw in this hall was manna from heaven for me. So this is a nice piece of vellum here, which records the event in March of 2014 when the Duke of Edinburgh was admitted as a freeman of the Ironmonger's Company. Now, that's important because it's after his 90th birthday. You may recall the BBC TV interview that Fiona Bruce did with the Duke of Wellington, where he said, "I think I've done my bit." And he committed to reduce the number of organisations of which he was a patron or royal colonel or commander-in-chief or whatever his status was. And you know what? It was as good as his word. In the following year, he withdrew from 12 different organisations, leaving him only 780 to keep him out of trouble. But what he didn't do was make any commitment to not joining new ones. And this was the last livery company that he joined. The Duke of Edinburgh was a prolific liveryman, a very active liveryman. In fact, I think he was involved in 11 livery companies. Amongst others, he had gone on to become the Prime Warden, the master of the Fishmongers' Company. And it was he who suggested, after the coronation, that the Fishmongers' Company commissioned a portrait of Her Majesty to celebrate the coronation, and that's the Anagoni portrait that they have in Fishmongers' Hall to this day. He subsequently made other suggestions amongst the livery company circuit, including that the Guild of Air Pilots, when they acquired their royal charter, they might want to consider becoming an honourable company. So they're one of only 2 livery companies that are called honourable rather than worshipful. And that was a suggestion from the Duke of Edinburgh. You can imagine what his kind of suggestions were like. A couple of other artefacts of just a tangential interest here. I might skip through some of these. So the Ironmonger's Company have salamanders in their coats of arms, and this is it's on the stairs. There's a couple of salamanders embracing what I guess is a pineapple. Salamanders in heraldry are supposed to be so cold that they can put out fire. So that's a connection with the Ironmonger's Company. They appear in also the coat of arms of the Worshipful Company of Firefighters and the Worshipful Company of Insurers as well. On the right hand side there we see an estrich. That's not misspelt, that's how heraldically it is described, an estrich, which was processed in the Lord Mayor's Show of 1629 when the master of the Ironmonger's Company became Lord Mayor. What's interesting about this is this had an Indian boy riding on the back of it. And we've got the records of it processing in the Lord Mayor Show with an Indian boy riding on the back. And the master ironmonger sent to India to procure a boy to ride said estrage in Lord Mayor's Show. So it formed a tableau on what we would now call float. Let's skip over the next one and go into the drawing room, where we see on the wall this fabric here. No prizes for guessing this is William Morris. The design is called Bird. Let me show you that in context. So there it is in the drawing room. You may note that the area around the door there is rather lighter than the rest. Okay? So this is rather lighter than the rest. That's not the light falling on it, it's actually brighter. It was when I went in there and photographed it. And I asked the clerk to the company, that's the chief executive, what's happened here? Because this was all contemporary to 1920s. Yes, about that. We had a small leak in the bathroom of the master's flat above the, just above the doorway there. It wasn't a big deal. Not, you know, we got someone in to deal with the leak over the weekend. But do you think the ironmongers went to a reputable plumber qualified by the Worshipful Company of Plumbers? No. So the chap that came in and did the plumbing work over the weekend made the issue rather worse. And by the time they came in on Monday morning, all of this was soaked, the plaster was falling down from the wall, and it was a much bigger issue. So they're insured, not a problem. They got the V&A in to say, can we have this restored to its original state? We said, that's not a problem. But whatever is restored will end up being brighter than the rest. This used to be the smoking room, hence the rest of it's a bit subdued. So eventually they went round and cleaned it all. But that's not the end of the story. The V&A said, do you know what you have here? And I said, yes, it's a William Morris wall hanging. Yes, okay. When was this building built? 1920s. Is this contemporary to the... Yes, it is. This dates from the 1920s. Okay. So it's after Morris's time, but it's contemporary to the build of the hall. It's been permanently in situ, and the V&A said it's the largest expanse of original William Morris wall hanging anywhere in Europe. And the Ironmongers Company have no idea how they obtained it, where they obtained it from. It clearly wasn't an offcut. There we go. Right, we'll skip past the next one, I think, and go on to the Haberdashers' Hall. So the Haberdashers' Hall, an ancient livery company, a very modern hall. They've had a number of halls in the city. In the, I think, 1990s, they decided to move again and opened a hall which is a medieval design. It's a quadrangle, very much like an Oxbridge College in terms of its interior layout, but it's a very bright and modern hall on the interior. When I've dined in there, you can clearly see that there are echoes of a kind of medieval design for the roof space, but it's modern materials and it's an entirely, contemporary design. So the whole thing was built on new. There within, a few artifacts that caught my eye. This particular banner here, so the Royal Arms, this was designed for the Diamond Jubilee. And you may remember the river pageant and the day when it rained so heavily. This was to be flown not from Gloriana, okay, but from the boat that the royal family rode on. But actually, on the day, they hung it over the rear because it was so heavy. It's full of sequins, very, very heavy. That particular boat I spotted on the Douro River in Portugal while on a cruise about 4 years ago. It's called the Spirit of Chartwell. So that's what became of it. And it literally just came around the corner there and I spotted it and thought, right, quick. Right, a couple of other things before we draw up stumps. Coat of arms of the Haberdashers' Company. We see it here in this carpet by Brinton. Brinton doing a lot of work for the National Trust. But the Haberdashers' Company have had two different coats of arms. This is the current one, That's the past one. Back to the current one. The past one. There's nothing to compare between the two. They're completely different designs. There's no echo of the previous design in the current. Now, both of these are lawfully granted armorial bearings. Coats of arms are not cheap to obtain. Today, for a corporate body, you're looking at about £15,000 to go through the whole process. That's before you start buying carpets and table mats, and that's just to go through the process. So why would a company that had a lawful grant of arms like this, 3 Catherine wheels on a chevron with 3 Badger's brushes, why would you go through the expense of petitioning for a new grant of arms like that? Well, I was led to believe these symbols of potential allegiance to the Church of Rome. And approximately the dates kind of work-ish, but no, this is actually during the earlier years of Henry VIII, not during the Elizabethan era. So it predates any difficulties with the Church of Rome, but it's certainly the case that many livery companies did remove any physical evidence of any connection with the Church of Rome when it wasn't politic to do so. Now, actually, what happened here was just a very mundane thing. The haberdashers' company absorbed another livery company called the Hurriers. Hurriers made rough wool caps, if you like. So they weren't a particularly prestigious livery company, but in the process of the merger, they decided to celebrate it. They would petition for a new design for a coat of arms. So there we go. I could go on for hours more. I've got masses of material, but I think we'll draw up stumps at that point in time. And I'm very happy to take any questions. So, fire away. Stunned.
How many livery companies and halls do you work your way around to achieve this?
So I've probably visited about 2/3 of the livery halls thus far. There are, this year, there are 40 livery halls in the square mile. There's another one about to be officially opened next year. I've actually got an early sneak peek and I'm writing a blog on it at present. It's open for business, but it's not officially open yet, and that's because Princess Anne's going to open it, and getting into her diary is the challenge. So it won't be officially opened until she's visited. So that's the hall of the Carmen's company, which is in a set of rooms which used to be a school adjacent to St Dunstan in the west. So I've done about 2/3 of the livery halls. There will be another livery hall joining the circuit very soon thereafter, which will be the hall of the Worshipful Company of Architects. What they've done is taken out a lease on the small room at the top of Temple Bar. So they're not building anything new. It'll be the smallest livery hall in the city, but it'll be theirs. So they will celebrate that. So actually there's a growth in livery halls, and by the time those 2 companies have officially opened their halls, there will be as many livery halls in the square mile as there were the night before the Great Fire. It's never been the case that every livery company has had a hall, and not every livery company can afford a hall. Certainly many clerks have told me that for every company that owns a hall, there's a time that they wish they didn't, and every company that doesn't have a hall, there's a time that they wish they did. So there can be a great liability. Yeah. The trajectory of livery halls will, I'm sure, continue to grow. With 110 livery companies and 5 new prospective livery companies in the making. So yeah, the livery companies are a growth business, both in terms of their number and the total size of their membership. There are now more freemen and liverymen of livery companies than at any point in time in recorded history. So, quite the opposite.
It deals with flowers and fruit and...
So there's Fruiterer's Company,
and,
yes. Yeah, Worshipful Company of Fruiterers. And despite being an ancient livery company, they have very, very strong links into their trade. I actually gave a speech at a prospective new members evening for the Fruiterer's Company last year, and it was fascinating how deeply connected they are with their trade. Research. I mean, I didn't know that you could patent a fruit, and fruit can be intellectual property. And the chap who was hosting me that evening essentially designs new fruit, and the genetic codes of that becomes IP that he owns, and then licenses that to growers. So,
Can you name one we're eating?
Sorry?
Can you name a registered fruit that we're eating?
Oh, good heavens. I took some home that evening, including a particular variant of dragon fruit, because they had put, as would the fruiterer's company befits them, they had a massive banquet of fruit, but they bought too much. And as the guest speaker, they said, "Oh, you must simply take this with you." So I took a couple of dragon fruit, I think persimmons and others, which were, unique. I don't know how to describe it, design or genetic variant. I principally took them home to show my children. The next morning, they were like, "What on earth is this?" And they were quite fascinated by it. But there we go. So I couldn't say with absolute certainty what they're called, but I certainly took some home. Any other questions?
Do the livery companies, or some of them, still have a regulatory role within their professions?
So for the benefit of those on camera, the question was, do any livery companies still have a regulatory role? Excellent question. So in about 2017, the livery companies held a craft fair or trade fair in Lincoln Cathedral. I went along for the day to do some filming, interviewing and blogging. Any perception that I might have had that livery companies had lost their connection with tradecraft and profession was completely blown out of the water that day. My first experience going into the cathedral, on the left-hand side was a young lady stitching away on some leatherwork. And I went up to her and said, "Would you mind if we had a chat?" I told her who I was. And she was working for the coach makers and coach harness makers company as an apprentice. I said, "Okay, this is interesting." She was telling me what she was doing. I said, "So you're an apprentice, they're supporting you in your career. Who's your employer?" "The Royal Mews." That set the standard for the discussions I had throughout the rest of the day. And I went to see the goldsmiths, I went to see the clockmakers, the masons, the plumbers, the bricklayers, the turners, the tilers. The list just went on and on and on and on and on. The only thing that day I thought was a bit of a misstep was, I think it's an organisation called the Royal Horological Society, whose tagline was, "We've been around quite some time." Cited next to the worshipful company of clockmakers that were about 400 years older. I wouldn't have had that tagline on that day in that situation, but there we go. So yes, actually, the number of livery companies that are no longer involved in any way in their tradecraft or profession, substantially involved, is very small. There are a number of them that still have inspection, enforcement, examination, awarding responsibilities. I won't go through them all, but that signet ring's got a hallmark in it. Whose hall? What mark? Goldsmiths Hall. They have a monopoly on the assay office. They run it. It's part of the hall. It's an operational company. I went around there with a private guided tour group just a week before last, and the deputy clerk there, Colonel Simon Hutchinson, was at absolute pains to emphasise this is a working company. It is a commercial enterprise that just happens to occupy a palace. Gun makers. All firearms from 30mm caliber or below in the United Kingdom either have to go to Proof House in Commercial Road or the one in Birmingham. And they test all of those firearms to ensure that the barrels won't split. Farrier's company run the Farrier Registration Act. It's illegal to shoot a horse in the UK unless you're qualified for it. I could go on. The answer is emphatically yes. It's inspection, enforcement, examination, awarding, education, professional development. It's enormous. Unfortunately, livery companies are often quite reserved, and they sometimes confuse that reservedness with being a little bit opaque, and there's no need for that. They're trade associations. Excellent question. Okay, I don't know how much longer we've got before summer, but have we got time for another couple of questions?
10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay, we've got time for plenty of questions.
Well, some people might like to go to the pub.
Yeah, there's always that as well. But let's take, so if anyone's got another question, very happy to answer it. Of course, I'm hanging around. You can come and grill me if you wish. I hope everyone's had the opportunity to look at the Freedom Certificate there.
Oh, this one.
Yeah, that one there.
Will you tell us about it? What's actually, when you pull it open?
So, in what respect? What's the importance of this?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a copy of Freedom. It's an original. The only reason I got this is as a demonstration aid. Mine's framed. After I got mine framed, I contacted the Guildhall and said, "Can I get a copy of it, please, so I can use as a demonstration aid?" And they said, "No, you need to get the program. You've got the original. We don't make copies, despite the fact it's called a copy on the outside. So don't lose it. Look after it." However, we've got a few in a cupboard here that people have sent back. Whatever. Families of house clearances have just sent it in to us, not knowing what better to do with them. So this was, up until 1835, your right to trade in the square mile. You didn't have this, you couldn't trade. So when someone was admitted as a freeman of the City of London, they could only be admitted by presentation of a livery company. So you first had to be a member of a livery company. You could join, as you can today, by apprenticeship, doing your 7 years, by patrimony, by inheriting the right from your mother or father, so long as they were a member of the company before you were born, or by paying a fine, which is how modern livery companies accrue their membership. My company is just about at the stage where we're having the second generation of members joining. So the first patrimony membership. So you would be presented by a livery company, go to Guildhall, go through a ceremony which is essentially unchanged for the last 800 years or so, and you swear your allegiance to the Queen, you agree to alert the Lord Mayor of any disturbances in the city, threats to the peace, and then you would pay a sum, which today goes to the Freeman's School, so it goes to charitable purposes, and you would receive this. And when the Chamberlain presented this to you, you'd shake your hand and say, "I give you joy." I'm giving you basically a license to go and print money in the square mile. So since 1835, it's no longer been a requirement to be a member of a livery company in order to become a freeman, but it is still a requirement to be a freeman in order to stand for election to Common Council, to become a Common Councilman, Sheriff, Alderman, or Lord Mayor. And within the livery companies, it is a requirement that you become a freeman of the City of London to progress from freeman of a company to liveryman of the company. Freeman of the company, freeman of the City of London, two sides of the same coin. Nothing to do with Freemasonry, incidentally. Nothing whatsoever. Okay.
Right, Paul, thank you. That was absolutely fascinating. I had no idea. Supper's served in about 10 minutes, so anyone wants a refreshing drink, please do. And you're staying for dinner, yes?
I am, yes. Very happy to stay for dinner. Happy to
Can I have my book, please?
You certainly can. I've got credit card. Incidentally, this is hot off the presses. The Platinum Jubilee edition was published just 2 weeks ago. And I've given particular focus to the royal connections with the City of London, which are immense. Immense. Okay, let's go.
Yes.